Welcome to episode 21. Today we talk with Jim Antal, who has been involved in environmental justice for decades. He's got a new book out, Climate Church, Climate Change. And this conversation is really part two of a two-part series on climate change and the church's response. If you haven't listened to episode 20, you might want to go back and check out that conversation with Phoebe Murad of Lutherans Restoring Creation. Today I talk with Jim just a few moments, well, maybe weeks, before he retires as the executive minister of the Massachusetts United Church of Christ, where he's been serving for a while. But before he went out the door, we had a chance to talk about his work in this important and vital central piece of our theology, of our church, and of our planet. Once again, I want to thank the Mission Investment Fund of the ELCA for sponsoring this podcast.
Oh, it's an odd story. I went to college as a scientist. I come from a family of scientists, and then I made a turn in college and went in the direction of religion. But I thought I would be an academician. And in the early 70s, I learned that environmental ethics was just a barely emerging topic at that time. So I studied at Yale, both for the MDiv and the PhD in environmental ethics, and before it was really a field, and taught for 13 years. And I was teaching assistant of Henry Nouwen's at that time, who's a well-known Catholic spiritual writer. And he and I became good friends. And he always wanted me to become a minister, but I was pretty reluctant in that regard. And finally, Henry got his way when I was 36 years old. I had led the Fellowship of Reconciliation for a few years and done a bunch of peace work. And I became a local pastor in '86 for 10 years in Newton, and then 10 years in Ohio, just outside of Cleveland, before 12 years ago when I became conference minister here in Massachusetts.
Yes, I remember the Cleveland connection, Shaker Heights, as I recall, because my son lived out there for a while, so drove through your old neighborhood, rode my bike through your old neighborhood, actually.
Well, it's a good way to travel there. I did a lot of bike riding there myself.
So the origins of so you have a new book out. Do I have the title correct? Climate Church, Climate Change?
Climate Church, Climate World.
Climate World. And so this obviously goes back a long time for you in your own interest in environmental justice and science and so forth. What brought you to write this book? And how could you write a book at the same time of being a conference minister? That's just beyond me.
Well, those two things kind of go together, I think, actually. My passion has not really wavered much since the first Earth Day in 1970. And I spent about 12 or 15 years working against nuclear weapons. But the focus of my work then was really to protect the Earth and all living things. And so when climate change began to emerge in the mid-'80s, I began to shift my focus from nuclear weapons and nuclear proliferation toward climate change. So I preached my first climate sermon in 1989. That's when Bill McKibben wrote the first popular book on climate change as well. In terms of my work, as a leader of 360 churches and also writing this book, when I took this position, I said to the board of directors that I would need to spend at least 10% of my time on climate change. And they looked back at me like I had two heads and said, wait a minute, this is a pretty big job. What are you talking about? You won't have there won't be enough time in the day to pull that off. I said, listen, I cannot responsibly take on this leadership role unless I'm spending a considerable amount of my time addressing the greatest moral issue of our day, perhaps of any day. And we talked a little bit and they got behind me. And for the past few years, I've really spent maybe 20% of my time addressing climate change. And I'm the national spokesman for our denomination on it. When I had a sabbatical, I reviewed all the books that had anything to do with religion and the environment and religion and climate change. And I thought, actually, from the position of being a denominational leader, I had something to say that had not yet been written. And I set about to writing it. And, the story of how it got published was interesting. Also, their publishers were a little reluctant to grab this book until a little less than a year ago, our denomination, the United Church of Christ, passed a response at our National Synod gathering, a response to Trump's pullout from the Paris Climate Accord. So a month after Trump pulled out, we were gathering for our every 2-year gathering, and the vote was 97%. In order to essentially say two things, that pastors needed to preach on climate change, and that the United Church of Christ was committed to resist all new fossil fuel infrastructure in the United States. When the Boston Globe wrote a big article about that resolution, all of a sudden I had several book offers. The publishers realized that this was not an obscure topic, but one that actually had some legs.
And so there's a lot that's been written. There are numerous books out there that are both popular and secular, and there are some that are in the world of religion and world religions and climate change. What's unique about your book? What makes it different than the others?
Well, there's several things. I mean, being, as you are, Jim, being so familiar with churches and the diversity of churches, I feel like I'm able to not be speculative about what it's like to be a pastor, but I'm pretty knowledgeable about the wide range of what it means to gather as church on a Sunday morning, and to be able to communicate a consistent message that the church must re-engage its own self-identity as the moral compass for the nation in relation to the fact that the earth is the Lord's, and we have done nothing but screw it up, and to do that in a way that it can be universally applied no matter what your church setting, and lay out the sort of ethical and moral obligation to do so, again, no matter what your church setting. I really felt like that had not been said before. And what I tried to do is to provide a roadmap. Sounds too detailed, but a bunch of guidelines as to how churches can, in fact, engage that.
And so this book is written for what's the group that's most going to appreciate this? Is this going to be clergy? Is this going to be invested lay people? Is it a study guide?
It's really a study guide. I'd say two things. It's a study guide. At the end of each chapter, there's 10 to 15 questions for discussion at the end of each of the 9 chapters. And also, there's a chapter on preaching on climate change. Plus, there's an appendix at the end, and that appendix corresponds to each of the chapters, providing the clergy with preaching suggestions that relate, 5 suggestions for chapter 1, 7 suggestions for chapter 2. And it helps spark their imagination as to how, in their unique setting, they might be able to take a run at, offering up comments. For example, one of the chapters is on discipleship and how we need to reorient what we prize. Well, any pastor can preach a sermon on that, but they might need a little help in relating that to climate change. And, just as one example, this book provides a lot of help in that regard.
So it's a real resource guide for congregations that can make the connection to what we kind of know as existing, approaches, whether it be discipleship or stewardship, and how that can, have its roots and connections with climate change, and but at the same time bring climate change into those conversations and topics. Sounds like a good guide, good resource for people.
Thank you. It's already the case that there are dozens of congregations that have initiated using it as a study guide. I just got back from a sort of a preaching and book tour down in North Carolina, and I in 2 days I had 6 different gatherings around the triangle there of Chapel Hill, Raleigh, Durham, and the interest in it was significant.
So I want to ask you a question that the reason I'm asking you the question is because I get asked it. And it tends to come from people who are more conservative on the political spectrum, not extremely so. And it is not that they, quote, don't believe in climate. They're not in the deniers camp. But what they say to me is, I understand about climate change, but it seems like the economic cost to doing something about it is, it doesn't work. It doesn't add up for them. How, I have various responses and so forth, but I'm interested, what do you say when you get asked that question?
So, if that's really where they're coming from, and that's not and if that's not some kind of a cover for some, deeper pushback, that really then the response is very, very simple. And that is that, we already have all the solutions we need, in terms of technology, and those solutions are economically viable right now. Professor Mark Jacobson out at Stanford in 2009, so this is almost 10 years ago, began a study that he completed in 2013, at which time he proved that each of the 50 states can be fossil fuel free by 2050. Then he turned his attention to the rest of the nations and showed that every nation can be fossil fuel free by 2050. And then by the time he got done with those 2 studies, he sort of, redid the math. And given the fact that the efficiency of solar and the efficiency of wind has so accelerated during the past 10 years, it's actually the case that if we were simply to make a commitment to do it, we could do it by 2035.
Wow.
All of that is simple fact. And so people who are concerned about economics need to embrace that. Another thing that really helps people out, who are, again, are sincere in that regard, and they just haven't heard in the public media that it's economically viable. Another thing to help them realize is, I tell a little story that goes like this, that in 1939, if FDR had gone to Edsel Ford and said to him, I want you to build the largest manufacturing plant in the world, and I want you to do it with such urgency that you finish it in 6 months. And by the time you finish the plant, I want you to be churning out something you've never built before, something with over 1 million parts, and make that thing every single 24 hours. Edsel Ford in 1939 would have said to FDR, you're out of your mind, sir. But when FDR said it to him in 1941, Edsel Ford built the Willow Run manufacturing complex, and 6 months later, the Ford Motor Company was churning out a B-24 Liberator bomber every 24 hours.
So it can be done when there's both the will to do it and a profit to be made, because Edsel Ford did that because he knew there was a great market for that, namely the U.S. government was going to be purchasing those for World War II.
You make a really great point there about profit. The real issue here is, will we allow a bunch of companies who are insisting on profiting in the last stages of the fossil fuel boom, will we allow them to continue to rape the earth and to cost our grandchildren their health. While in fact, all we need to do is to shift the profit over to a bunch of other innovative companies who are building solar and they're building wind and they're doing other kinds of renewable energy. It's simply a matter of shifting the profit from these old traditional companies like ExxonMobil and Shell and Chevron and giving those same profits over to other more innovative companies.
Well, it's the old adage, follow the money, and it applies in many aspects of life, and certainly, obviously, in this particular area as well.
That's exactly right.
Where, I know one of the people that I follow in this area is the work that Michael Bloomberg's doing, and where are you? One of the things that he has shown me is there is actually a lot that is being done. So where are you seeing hope that this topic is being addressed? Because I know it can be very frustrating work, and it can be certainly the kind of thing that we if you just look to Washington right now, Washington D.C. and government, it's maybe not as particularly hopeful, but there is a lot that is hopeful that's addressing this topic around the world. What are you seeing?
So a couple of things. Within 1 week of when President Trump pulled the United States out of the Paris Climate Accord, a bunch of mayors and governors and business leaders who made a commitment to keep the entities they oversee, whether it's a city or a state or a business, to keep them within the Paris climate agreements. And if you add up the economic power of those cities, states, and businesses, this is 1 week after Trump pulled us out. It's worth $6 trillion. So there are plenty of people who are saying, listen, we know that we have to make this transition. We know it's in the interests of society and in the interests of our own children to make the transition as quickly as possible. And they're doing it. And that's as true about the business sector as it is about the governance sector. Another story that there's so many stories that people just don't know, Jim. And when you know these stories, I think it really can billow a person with hope. Back in roughly 2005, I may not have this dates exact, but it's footnoted in my book. The CEO of Walmart learned about climate change, and he asked a simple question of his engineers. He said, "How much roof surface do we have in our worldwide network of stores?" Because they have the biggest worldwide network of retail stores in the world. And the guy gave a response. He said, "What if we covered it all with solar panels?" And the guy looked at him like he was crazy. He says, "We need to do this." So he went to his board meeting the next week and he said, "Listen, we're making a commitment to this." It turns out he wasn't his term ended or he retired a couple of years later, but his successor kept it up. And Walmart now hosts the biggest single sort of set of solar panels of any retailer in the world. Who knows that?
Wow, I did not know that.
We should all know that. Who knows that Iowa, the state of Iowa, gets 35 or it might even be 38% of its electricity from windmills? Who knows that, Jim? Iowa. Who knows that Texas has the biggest install of wind power in the country? We don't know these facts, and we need to. So when we feel like we're down and we don't have much hope, my experience is that there's a whole lot being done out here, but for whatever reasons, and people would have different add-ups as to the reason, for whatever reason, our media does not focus on those hopeful aspects. We end up focusing on the much more depressing aspects, which we're all too articulate about, aren't we?
Yeah, well, that is true. There is kind of this obsession with the negative that feels like it's ratings. You're mentioning Texas reminds me of a year and a half ago, my wife and I were actually driving through Texas, and that news about windmill generation of energy there, that doesn't surprise me at all, because just driving across that state, they were everywhere.
Yeah.
And it was, kind of the oil state. Well, maybe the wind state is what is evolving. Yeah.
It's a both and that's one of the points you mentioned Bloomberg earlier, and one of the points that Bloomberg makes, and this wonderful book with Bloomberg and Pope, they put it together. One of the points that they make is that in this time of transition, we really do need both and. And I myself, as an activist, I recognize what here in Massachusetts our Attorney General recognizes. We in Massachusetts do not need any more natural gas pipeline. Our governor has not yet acknowledged that his Attorney General a year and a half ago did a report, and it's all detailed. It's like 50 pages long. I've read it. And it's absolutely clear that we need no more natural gas. Then the natural gas companies, they provide the governor with a bunch of reports that fabricate information and provide the governor with an excuse to suggest, well, we may need, a pipeline in the Back Bay, or we may need a pipeline out in Roxbury. I've been arrested out in Roxbury, as you may know, and friends of mine have been arrested in the Back Bay, blocking those pipelines. And, that's exactly the kind of thing which, we who are committed to nonviolent civil disobedience can do in order to make this transition go faster.
So you're going to be retiring here in another month or so from your work as the conference minister in the UCC in Massachusetts. I assume that you are not going to be retiring from this work.
Yeah, you and I know each other well enough that you assume correctly.
What are your plans?
Our national setting has conferred upon me the title of Special Advisor to our denomination's General Minister and President on climate change, and that will allow me to, continue to preach and continue to speak about this. And really to do so as an advocate, as a denominational leader and advocate on this issue. So I expect to be able to do that for many years to come, and this book is a good launch of that work.
Well, that's good. We'll have to get you some Lutheran exposure in your new role. So we'll find a way to engage you in this particular topic in ways that can further the message that, this is something that is a problem, but it's also a problem that, as you pointed out in this conversation, is something that we can address and we can solve.
That's exactly right.
Yeah. Well, thanks so much for being with us. And I'm hoping that you have a wonderful next 6 weeks and many years ahead in your work in this area.
Thanks so much, Jim. This is a great conversation.